So it looks like you actually didn't. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. But first, definitely want to thank everyone for coming today. As you can see, we're going to talk about Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, how and why it was created. And does anybody recognize where I got the title from?
The Moody Blues.
Nah, X-Men.
I was just thinking like.
Yeah, X-Men. So X-Men, the movie Days of Future Past, Wolverine went back to the past, I think it was. Yeah, he went back to the past to change the future. So what I'm basically going to talk about is why Ethereum Classic happened, why it was created, and what would have happened if it wasn't created. So just a quick introduction about Blackchain. Blackchain is a blockchain education platform, and our goal is to create a community built around education. We basically see and saw a need for better understanding of blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and why certain things happen in the space, such as like hard forks, soft forks, and just explore ways you can use the technology to solve current issues. And my co-founder, Kingsley, is here as well. The guy in the purple, not a purple shirt, but a burgundy shirt.
Hello, everybody.
He's a little camera shy, so. Great, so let's actually go into, I would love for everyone to just go around and introduce yourself. Say your name, your current role, and what you're hoping to learn today. I'm gonna start with this.
Hello. Hi, I'm Colin Lowenberg. I just quit Cisco Systems to run the Developers Relation Program at Dispatch.
John Connors, here at Community Development and Starfish Mission, and I want to learn more about the deltas between Ethereum Classic and Ethereum Present, I guess.
There you go.
My name is Ahmad Wilson. I'm an infrastructure DevOps software engineer, and basically I'm just looking to learn more about blockchain in general, but especially Ethereum.
My name is Peter McKay. I work in marketing at Dispatch Labs with Colin and Corey, and they were too gracious to say it, but I will. I just want to learn about Ethereum before we beat the living shit out of it.
He said that I didn't.
My name's Norman. I'm with a blockchain consultant called Applicature. I'm here because I'm just curious about the industry, about the space. I don't know that much about the history, and also wanted to meet other people who are interested in being educated about it.
I'm Giovanni Saletti. I'm an investment banker, a broker-dealer registered, and I deal with ICOs and crowdfinancing and mergers and acquisition. And yeah, I want to know what the difference is between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Franklin Klein, Alphen at Voicebridge. I'm on a path now to learn about blockchains with Ethereum being one that I don't have to have a huge expense account to do some of the things with it. And I'm interested in some of the projects out there that promise to be able to communicate between a number of some of these different kinds of blockchains.
Interoperability. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Bruno. I blog about. I come here to translate from the developer side to the masses so that people can understand and use in their day-to-day lives. And I'm particularly in favor of the free market and taking the middleman out of scene.
Hi, my name is Rue, and I'm a client relations director with Atlas Lawyer. And I'm here to kind of just see how you guys tell the story and judge whether it's actually close to the truth, because I'm quite close to one of the people that was part of it as well. Thank you.
We'll have ample time for that at the end.
And I actually didn't give a proper intro to myself. Again, Corey, I'm the growth community manager for Dispatch Labs, a decentralized or distributed storage solution that's actually built that enables you to write solidity contracts to move data around. Okay, so let's get into it. So I wanted to talk about why. So Ethereum Classic, the story behind it is quite interesting. It definitely caused a split in the community. You have Bitcoin purists who were looking at, how many people here are familiar with TARP, the TARP program? The bailout program. So essentially, Ethereum Classic was the cryptocurrency version of TARP. And there was a subset of people who didn't want that to happen because they believe in no government intervention. And then there was a part of people who said, well, if we don't let this happen, then cryptocurrency won't move forward. And this actually caused a huge kind of paradigm shift when you look at why hard forks occur. And most of the time they're profit driven. And usually what you see is when developers do make a mistake, when they admit their mistake, they actually create a new currency to compensate the original investors. One with deception to particularly NIM as an example. CoinCheck was hacked for I think 400 million NIM, and the people who created CoinCheck actually went to NIM and said, "Hey, we should do a hard fork to pay for people who lost their money." And NIM said, "No, we won't, but we'll create a coding tagging system similar to if you went to a retail store and you try to steal something and the ink kind of spills on the shirt, so everyone knows you stole it." NIM created a digital version of that, but this was a kind of what I would call a prelude to how developers deal with these type of incidents. Great, so what is the DAO? So the DAO stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. And the idea was that it would be essentially a venture capital company that would be started by or ran by smart contracts. Thank you. Cool. Yeah, that's dope. So the idea is that you wouldn't need people to run the venture capital firm. You would essentially have a series of if-else statements programmatically into a contract, and if certain things were met, then projects that were built on Ethereum would receive funding. They raised 163 million, and at the time it was 15% of all the Ethereum that was ever produced. So how it happened is quite simple. So I would actually say that it was due to a poor separation of concerns. So basically, 18,000 plus people contributed to the DAO, and all of the monies were placed into one wallet, which we can call the adult DAO. There was a recursive programming code bug that allowed people to create a child DAO. And through that bug, a hacker exploited it and actually went backwards essentially and started importing money from the adult DAO into this child DAO. And then some people caught it, and he actually ended up taking about $40 million. And that actual bug was presented to the core developers behind Ethereum and the DAO before it happened, but they said, this is not going to happen, we're not worried about it. And a part of me believes that it was somewhat of an inside job, actually. The crazy thing is that money is actually still stuck inside of that child DAO, so the hacker wasn't able to get it. So there were, yeah, go ahead.
Is that because the feds are watching that particular pool of money now, or is that because it's inaccessible?
Inaccessible. So when they moved the money, it opened up a 28-day hold. And then there was something else, I need to look into it again, but basically they haven't been able to move the money around. They haven't been able to take it out. So the hacker hasn't even, we don't know who the hacker was, and that hacker hasn't even been able to take the money out of it. Yeah.
Well, technically, if it was because of, the government or the Fed or whoever was watching it, they could do it from anywhere, they could spoof their location. Who cares whether or not somebody's watching it?
Yeah, that's what I'm
saying.
Yeah. So there was two proposed solutions: the hard fork, which was basically creating a new chain, which was rejected by what I would call the Bitcoin purists, or anybody who is familiar with economics, the classical economists, right? The people who believe in no government intervention, no bailout. They believe that the market can solve its own problems, which is true. But you have things like the Great Depression that can happen and last for almost 15 years. So the first thing that was actually proposed was to do a soft fork. And it looked like it was actually going to be pushed through, but at the last minute, they actually found a bug in the soft fork that would allow for a denial of service or DDoS attack, which would allow a miner to block transactions and simply print their own money. So they said, you know what, we're not going to do that. And again, we have to think about the pressure that they were thinking about, right? 15% of all the Ethereum that was ever printed was wrapped up into this, right? So they wanted an easy way to compensate the original investors, because essentially, if they hadn't done things correctly, we probably wouldn't have had the bull run that we had last year. My guess is that a good portion of the investors who made some good money during that bull run, if Ethereum Classic wouldn't have happened, they wouldn't have had any money. So the next option was to do a hard fork, which is essentially creating a new blockchain, a new cryptocurrency, and that's basically what Ethereum Classic was. Any questions there?
Yeah, so there's been a hard fork and a soft fork. Hard fork is basically a fork within the code, the source.
Right, so a soft fork is backwards compatible, right? So meaning, think of like whenever you update your iPhone, right? It's backwards compatible to the phone you actually use, a good portion of them, right? If you have like an iPhone 4, you probably can't update 11, right? But if you have a 6S, you can update to the iOS 11, because it's backwards compatible to phones up until that time. When you do a hard fork, essentially you're creating a new piece of software that's not backwards compatible. It's literally just like, you can't play you can't put a PS4 game into a PS3 game. Same idea. So great. So I kind of just touched on it earlier, but basically, if the Ethereum Classic wasn't created, we wouldn't be where we are today as far as cryptocurrency. I believe that it's a good chance that the economic boom that we've seen in the industry wouldn't have happened, just because the core supporters of blockchain tech with real money were supporting it. And then also too, I don't necessarily believe in the idea of free market. I think governments should, or there should be some type of intervention involved in the economy. Not fully, but some type of medium ground, right? And quite honestly, people like whatever happens that's in their favor, quite honestly, right? So anything that's in your favor, you're probably going to want financially, specifically, right? Just being honest there. So I also wanted to bring up another point too. If you look at the names of Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, your name should actually be reversed, right? So what we call Ethereum should actually be called Ethereum Classic, and then Ethereum Classic should actually be called Ethereum. So that's pretty much it. Any questions?
How is this decision-making process, how does it work? Is it done by the miners? Is it like who's doing this? Where's the governance? What's behind it?
Yes, so when you look at different blockchains, there's I guess you can say three main parties, but they're somewhat combined. So you have the miners who are mining or supporting the network. You have investors, right? People who are invested in the chain, and those investors could be miners too, right? And then you also have the core developers or the leadership team behind the foundation, right? And depending on, so if you look at Bitcoin as an example in Ethereum, Bitcoin doesn't have that one central person or people who actually control the network, right? The miners actually pretty much control things that happen in it. With Ethereum, it's a lot different. Ethereum, Vitalik, and the team are pretty active on Twitter. They voice their opinions, and if they say they want something, it will happen. So my guess is, basically from what I saw, is that the core team were behind that fork happening, and they pretty much have their hand in control of the community. But again, it depends on the actual blockchain and the community around it.
So what was the internal fight between Vitalik and maybe whatever the opposition was? What had that?
It was purely philosophical, right? So, and I can actually pull up the article where it actually talks about it. But basically, it was, like I said, it was purely just philosophical, where there was just a subset of people who believed that they shouldn't be quote unquote bailed out, that the smart contract that was written, that was law. So technically the law was broken, so why should I compensate someone who broke the law or whatever, right? So a lot of times what you'll notice in this space is that the logic, hold on, that's the wrong page. What you'll notice is that the logic behind why they don't want certain things to happen isn't always the most sound thing to do for growing a community, right? Because at the end of the day, these blockchains, the best things that they have going for them is the community around the currency or the blockchain they're creating. So let me see here. And this basically talks about it, right? So so code is law. Like you just read it here. I don't want to read it verbatim. But basically, like I said, right, it's a bailout. They said, hey, this is a bailout. We're acting just like the U.S. government, where they sent out, I think it was what, $800 billion, something like that, something that Obama signed to give to banks and stuff like that. So they looked at this as like, we're just recreating the environment that created the economic recession that we had previously, right? And then most of the people who were for probably had a vested interest in that happening because they lost their money, right? So, and then it was actually really at the fault of the developers who wrote the code too, quite honestly. I mean, that's how I see it, so.
Quick question. So when the bug was exposed, was it in the private Slack of the Ethereum community? Where was that information leaked or brought to
I'm not quite sure, but I would suspect it was brought to their attention on something like Bitcoin Talk, because that's usually where I know with Verge, before their first 51% attack, a developer found the bug and mentioned it to them on Bitcoin Talk.
So Bitcoin Talk is a platform which anyone can look at, not just insiders or only insiders?
Anyone. So it's a think of it as the Reddit, but for cryptocurrency and blockchain. And that's usually where you see a lot of news come out, like hot news about developers, because it's very technical. So people there are talking about the deep technical side of cryptocurrencies and blockchain.
So I have a question, anyone feel free. So Ethereum versus Ethereum Classic, right? Like you have proof of work, but like planning definitely to go to proof of stake in the future. That's Ethereum, right? And you have Ethereum Classic, which is still proof of work. I haven't heard of any plans from them to actually make any sort of transition to proof of stake. Is that something that's like tied to their like branding? Are they just like true to the actual source, to the level where they're like, we're gonna maintain proof of work, despite
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think so. With Ethereum Classic, not that many apps are built on top of it, and I haven't heard anything about them moving to proof of stake. The biggest news I've heard about Ethereum Classic is basically number one, it's now going to be supported by Coinbase. So now you can buy Ethereum Classic on Coinbase, and then when that happened, other exchanges are now supporting it. So I haven't really heard anything about them changing their consensus model, which makes sense, like I said, because not that many apps are really built on top of it in comparison to Ethereum. And Ethereum Classic, it is going to switch to proof of stake. It's a little bit more information you probably asked for, but I actually believe that's going to be a hard fork, just because it's a change in the consensus model. So I see that being the hard fork, but they haven't said anything publicly about it. Just what I envision being that it's an inherent change in the consensus model. I just don't see how it can remain on the same chain using a different system, consensus model from proof of work.
In regards to the decision-making process, what's the lesson here? What should we have learned from this incident going forward with other cryptocurrencies?
I think the main thing that I like to do with telling the backstory about different currencies and how they're created is that it's important to understand its actual value, right? Because of what we see in the space oftentimes is people are just investing because people are talking about it or the price is low, right? So it's like, you know, would you spend like $100 on like a pound of salt? Probably not, right? But if you were, you know, in like West Africa, way back in the day, it had real value. Like they actually used it. You know, we have refrigerators now, so salt value isn't as high, right? So understanding the backstory behind different blockchains, to me, will help you make better informed decisions on whether you should invest in them, whether you should build your app on top of them, stuff like that, whether you should be a miner.
So what's scary to me is if Vitalik had a different philosophy, this whole outcome could have been entirely different and people could have lost.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like in the space, part of the reason why I don't like to use the word decentralized, because to me it just means that you don't want to pay taxes, right? It's not necessarily like not centralized. It's not necessarily the opposite of centralized. I mean, in definition, yeah, but when you look at application, you know, that's the good and the bad about the blockchain industry, right? You know, you just have to be very strategic and know your stuff in regards to these blockchains. Like I was talking to a buddy of mine, and we were talking about Verge, right? So the funny thing about Verge is that it's a hard fork of Dogecoin, and Dogecoin is actually a joke of Bitcoin. And then they basically kind of superimpose privacy on top of it, but the core developers don't understand the underlying technology, which is part of the reason why they weren't able to fix the bug, right? But Verge is partnered with Pornhub, right? So if Pornhub really understood that story, do you think they would have partnered with Verge? You see my point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
To expand on that a little bit, it is a good concern, and it is something to really talk about. The metaphor being used a little bit in this space is that Bitcoin's like anarchy, the Ethereum's like monarchy, and the EOS is like oligarchy. But you know,
It's a good one.
Those are not very good choices.
Well, I disagree on the anarchy side of it, but you know, I honor your perspective.
And the reason I ask this is because
I mean, if anarchy is in your favor, you like it. I mean, look
so I guess where I'm coming from is as a black man who has come to Bitcoin just saying, oh, no government, no bank, this is great. Now you're telling me, with the possible exception of Bitcoin, that there's personalities behind a lot of the decision making that goes into these individual.
it's all personality.
You still have to have discernment at every level, especially in this. You have to have discernment.
I
just buy into guarantee.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing you gotta realize.
Sure.
So information is key.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I kind of resent the whole monarchy
It's just, yeah,
I mean, like, Metallica has just as much potential and ability to commit to the Ethereum code base as anybody does. You know what I mean? He may have more influence because he's on Twitter and he's like super smart. You know what I mean? And people listen to him, you know what I mean? Because he's
So
showing his investment.
you nailed it. So it's not officially a gun.
It's not monarchy.
But it's an inference. It's an inference to the amount of
It's more like
investment.
Messi.
Yes, okay.
It's an inference. You know, he's not been crowned by
I
the
mean-
Pope. You know what I mean? But he's been
But
crowned
he's-
by
He's the king of all kings, man. Not just
So-
the king.
So to kind of add to John your point, on April Fool's, he tweeted out a joke. I didn't know the joke, probably because it was so nerdy. But he basically said, you know, I want a limited supply of Ethereum. And all of a sudden the community was like, yeah, we should limit the supply of Ethereum.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so Corey, that brings me back to something you said earlier, where you said that, you know, you believe the government has a role in markets. I was just wondering, could you expand on that a little bit? Like,
Are you saying that you think that the government should intervene in participating in the markets at certain points, or is it a regulation, more of a regulatory thing that you favor, or something else?
I mean, they're both one and the same, right? Like, you can interact in the market by constricting the monetary supply, or boosting it up, or setting regulation to make it harder to enter an industry. So there's he can add like here right here, but so there's two like schools of thought that economics that I follow, right? So there's classical economists, which is basically Reaganomics, where they believe in top down. I don't believe in that purely, right? I think there's some truth to that potentially. And then you have Keynesian economics, which believes in that government should intervene in certain instances, right? So, do you think we should have Social Security?
right, yeah,
Do you think we should have food stamps? Right? Like, I think we should have those. I think we do need some level of like socialism, but I don't think we need the government. The government prints money, so the government is essentially a profit. It's a business, you know. So,
But I think,
how can you use their money without them intervening?
could I differ on that, on what I've heard, that this national government might run printing presses to print the treasury notes, but this government is not the maker of money. Rather, the private organization, the Federal Reserve, is that which creates money and then loans it to the governmental entities. A while back, we were talking about the split in the Dow, and there was a comment there, and I'll try to compare it with one of the articles that I read about the split. The person over here was saying, well, now aren't the government people looking at it, at the little child with the $40 million in it, therefore making it inaccessible? Whereas the article was speculating that, hey, the one who put it in there was never, ever intending to go for the monetary value of the ether, but rather what they were after was the public relations, that news flash, so that they could use the market following in order to make a whole bunch of money, and which would be probably very large in comparison to that which was embezzled.
So basically, what you're saying is they did that so they can short Ethereum. That's perfectly plausible.
That was one guy's article.
Yeah.
This brings up a lot of great points. You know, I think the main thing that you said, Kingsley, right? Is that what I'm saying? Yeah, is that the discernment piece, the systems analysis piece, is what comes with this kind of game. You know what I mean? Anyone who just buys into a game and thinks that everything's okay because, I don't know, has been asleep the last 20 years, you know? And this kind of conversation about monetary systems, monetary structures, things like that, lead to, I think, a potential much more empowered civic class than could ever exist had we not had these conversations.
Also, I mean, it's kind of, the trade-off just seems like, I don't know if it's just a philosophical thing or a conceptual thing, but on one hand you have an inconvenience, you know what I mean? Like all of the transactions that happen between the time that we forked and the actual attack happened, or when the actual attack happened and the time before anybody started losing money, right? So like the beginning of the attack to the time the attack was detected and people started taking, damage control actions versus people losing all of their money and just continuing on. You know what I mean? It just seems like the damage that that people were willing to incur based on those two just doesn't seem like it's merely this is what I believe in. You know what I mean? This is like, it's bigger than that, it feels like, right? So any lessons, at least that I took from it, was that those who decided to remediate the situation by doing something as simple as, making a fork in code and people losing, 20, 30, 40 minutes worth of transactions. Like, I don't know if it becomes in terms of policies and law and on a court of law, if somebody were to debate on it, where it would end up. But it just seems like the argument is heavily in favor of, people did not lose millions of dollars and people lost like 20 minutes of their time.
Yeah, I would say, the comparison to TARP I find interesting because I covered that as a newspaper reporter back in 2008. And the argument for TARP at the time was that was the ethics and the politics behind TARP was that if they did not do TARP, it would freeze up the whole economy and the human suffering at the scale of hundreds of millions of people would be too great. And so even though nobody liked the banks, they had to do it. Right.
It's funny that everybody in power who happened to be elected by Goldman or former Goldman Sachs people.
Right.
Told you that area.
Yeah, nobody was exactly, these were not sympathetic people.
And the
Trust me.
sorry to cut you off, to add to that, that's the only reason that Goldman Sachs received the bailout, not Bill Stern, because of, what's his name? Paulson?
Paulson was the Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah, he had the long glasses.
Not Geithner was one of the
bureaucrats.
Yielded to his master.
Yeah, that's why Bill Stern didn't get the money.
Bernanke also yielded to his master.
Well, keep in mind also, I wouldn't exactly say, well, the events were separated by a certain period of time, keep in mind. Bear Stearns failed about...
Earlier on, as punishment,
Earlier
they did with the S&M.
Yeah, earlier on and didn't, anyway. But there was a certain scale, and my only point is, there was a certain scale of human suffering they were trying to avoid, which it strikes me would not have been present in the Ethereum market, which is passionate as we all are about it. There's just not that many people, not as many dollars, like nobody's gonna. So, I don't know, it's philosophically similar, I agree, but the scale of human suffering you're talking about is a fraction.
Yeah, there was no human, basically young kids who had enough money, more money. But as you saw in that article, they said, we don't believe in the bailout. Right. So they were inherently thinking about, we don't want to create another TARP, like we're crypto people, that's why,
It's not really TARP.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a good way to have other people understand it, right? So I'm real big on using similes and metaphors. It's what's going on in space, so yeah. Any more questions?
So Ethereum is one without, for Ether, there's no maximum limit, whereas for Bitcoin, there is a mathematical top asymptote. Is that the big one?
21 million, yeah. 21 million.
It's certainly a different way to think about the changing price of a basic commodity such as coffee or sugar between the two systems.
Yeah, and Bitcoin was created, I have a couple theories on it, but the way it's talked about, it was created to upend our financial system, to basically make the IMF, the Federal Reserve, and the top financial oligarchs or whoever obsolete.
Yeah.
Ethereum basically wanted to improve upon Bitcoin's smart contract ability, right? So with Bitcoin, you can write smart contracts on it, but it's not Turing complete. So it's like very hard to write contracts on it, or it just takes a long time. Ethereum didn't want to, wasn't created to upend the financial system, basically to be able to, write smart contracts and automate and delete or eliminate the middleman.
You said you had a couple theories on Bitcoin?
Yeah, so one theory is that, it's the, who is it? That name of the organization, not the FBI, but,
NSA?
NSA, yeah, NSA. So the NSA back in the 70s was the only one organization that had, I think it's 264-bit technology encryption, right? So my theory is that they didn't lose that advantage, technological advantage, right? So, you know, I believe they created Bitcoin.
Oh, that's funny.
That's one of my theories. Because they were the only ones who had that level of technology. But
If you think
that's
about
like the conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Okay, no,
If you think about the 51% attack-ish of our society was leached on by a financial oligarchical elite, central banks in particular, that were you couldn't remove without like a whole lot of issues, possibly moral hazard for the entire population. So if you instead infiltrate with a kind of immovable cryptographic tank, and you just put it with like a Trojan horse more likely, and you can potentially remove the power of the banks and put it in the hands of already monopolistic government-controlled entities like your electric company.
Can you give me some evidence?
No, hell no.
I mean,
I never said there was evidence to it. I mean, absolutely not.
That's why I said that's why I said that's.
Yeah, I know what the evidence is doing. They give me security clearance with the NRDA, and they let me into in the backdoor meetings every day.
Yeah, that's why I said it's like another theory.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
I saw a video on YouTube and it was talking about encryption technology, cryptography and stuff. And it was like in the 70s, the NSA was the only one who had this.
They own all the cables going in and out of the river, which capture all